Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating piece of source documentation that puts the legal proceedings against a scholar, Dr. Chen Jingyuan, through an intense, multidisciplinary stress test. We're not just looking at the law in a vacuum here. This text evaluates the case using math, psychology, and hard science. It's an incredibly unique way to audit a legal system, and we're going to unpack exactly how the authors pulled off this analysis. So here is our roadmap. First, a multidisciplinary legal analysis. Then the evolutionary mismatch, social psychology of systems, the physics of networks, international human rights law, and finally, science meets judicial intuition. We'll be moving step by step from evolutionary psychology all the way to the physics of networks and global human rights.
Section 1. A multidisciplinary legal analysis. Stress testing a legal verdict through science.
The core premise here is absolutely fascinating. The document doesn't just ask if a verdict was strictly legal. It asks, does a legal decision actually hold up against the laws of physics and human psychology? Before we even touch the math or the law, the text poses a massive fundamental question. Can ancient human instincts explain modern judicial behavior? And to answer that, we have to pivot straight into biology.
Section 2. The evolutionary mismatch. Stone Age minds in modern courtrooms.
The authors rely on a concept called evolutionary mismatch as the bedrock theory to explain the judicial system's behavior in this case. They argue that our human brains literally evolved for small, face-to-face, high-trust tribal societies. Back then, we developed psychological modules for defending our status, enforcing group norms, and maintaining this hypersensitivity to threats. But when those ancient mechanisms are triggered in a modern, incredibly complex, bureaucratic legal system, well, the source argues they misfire terribly.
There's a stark conflict illustrated here. On one side, you have the Stone Age tribal mindset. It's highly sensitive to status threats, punishes any internal deviation to protect the group, and relies heavily on fear-based deterrence. Now contrast that with a modern legal system, which is built to rely on objective evidence, due process, and a tolerance for diverse information. The documentation argues that in Dr. Chen's case, the judicial actors essentially defaulted to that ancient tribal mindset. They saw a scholar exploring diverse online information as an internal deviation, a status threat. And the text posits they chose to punish him based on ancient evolutionary instincts, totally bypassing modern legal objectivity.
But that really begs the question, if these are just ancient instincts, how do modern, highly educated systems actually justify suppressing individuals on paper? How do the people inside those systems live with those decisions?
Section 3. Social psychology of systems. Group dynamics and institutional bias.
To explain how a system collectively rationalizes its actions and avoids cognitive dissonance, especially when acting without objective evidence, the text maps out Albert Bandura's famous mechanisms of moral disengagement. The authors claim officials use diffusion of responsibility simply by saying they're just following upper-level orders to avoid personal accountability. Then there's dehumanization, where they label Dr. Chen as a threat rather than a scholar. The text argues they deploy moral justification by framing the punishment as some noble quest to maintain public order. And finally, distortion of consequences. This is where the system just completely ignores the reality that Dr. Chen's posts had essentially zero impact. It's a textbook application of group psychology used to justify systemic bias.
Now, this brings us to a massive, and I mean massive, pivot in the documentation. The legal justification claimed Dr. Chen's posts caused severe public disorder, but the authors ask, is that even physically or mathematically possible? Can a single post with almost zero followers actually cause a system-wide avalanche?
Section 4. The physics of networks. The mathematical bounds of a cascade.
Here, the source dives straight into hard mathematics, comparing information spread to a literal neutron chain reaction. To stress test the prosecution's claims, the authors apply a specific mathematical model called the Galton-Watson stochastic branching process. This is the exact same math used in epidemiology to track viruses or in nuclear physics to model chain reactions. The text uses it to calculate the absolute physical limits of how far Dr. Chen's online posts could have actually propagated.
The absolutely crucial data point here is M, the mean offspring. Basically, how many new shares a single post generates. For an avalanche or a viral cascade to happen, M absolutely must be greater than 1. The text calculates that based on the account's followers and engagement, the mean offspring of Dr. Chen's post was 0.12. According to the document, this puts it in a deeply subcritical state, making a cascade mathematically impossible. No way around it. And because m is less than 1, the extinction probability, which is represented by q, approaches 1.0. To put that simply, the probability of these posts dying out within a few shares is essentially 100%. The source uses this hard data to argue that the prosecution's claim of a butterfly effect causing massive public disorder was a statistical zero probability event. In the realm of physics, the authors assert it did not and simply could not happen.
So if the text's mathematical audit proves there was no physical harm or disorder, how does the global community actually view the act of simply gathering and saving information? Does international law protect this kind of behavior?
Section 5. International Human Rights Law, the global standard of cultural rights.
The documentation now shifts gears into a strict legal audit using the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It points directly to Article 15 of this globally recognized treaty. Article 15.1a protects the right to participate in cultural life. 15.1b protects the enjoyment of scientific progress. And 15.3 specifically highlights the indispensable freedom of scientific research. The text argues that Dr. Chen's actions, gathering, forwarding, and studying diverse online information, fall strictly under protected academic freedoms and cultural rights. It's not criminal behavior, it's research.
Section 6. Science meets judicial intuition, the final synthesis. Bringing it all together, the text builds a fascinating forensic psychological profile of Dr. Chen, using the Big Five personality traits. They map him as having incredibly high openness to experience, meaning a really strong desire to seek out new knowledge, along with high conscientiousness, showing deep logical rigor. They also map him with very low extroversion, depicting an introvert who is definitely not out there trying to incite crowds. The source presents this as a profile of a highly rational, independent scholar experiencing post-traumatic growth. They argue this completely contradicts the system's portrayal of him as some irrational, dangerous threat to public order.
The text summarizes this intense clash between the system's claims and the actual math with a really powerful quote. The butterfly effect is not a physical law, but a product of critical states. The authors assert that punishing a single node in a network for an avalanche, when the network itself was never in a mathematically critical state, is just a complete logical fallacy.
And that leads us to the anchoring conclusion of the entire source document. True civilization does not suppress evolutionary psychology, but design systems to guide it. The text argues that, sure, humanity carries these ancient tribal instincts of fear and in-group bias, but the very purpose of modern law is to be explicitly designed to override those instincts, rather than letting them blindly drive judicial verdicts.
Which leaves us with a truly profound question drawn from the source material. When judicial intuition and ancient tribal instincts clash directly with mathematical certainty and scientific reality, which should govern our freedom? It's a thought-provoking question that challenges the very bedrock of modern justice. And it really asks us to consider how our own societies evaluate objective truth. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this explainer. Until next time, keep looking at the evidence.